Well, good morning, everyone. It's Peter with the Garden Family, and I wanted to give you an update on how our kitchen garden is doing here in Southwest Ohio, Zone 6A. Today I wanted to show you some of the things we're really excited and happy about, and I also intentionally left a few things that didn't really go so well in the garden so you can get a realistic view of the highs and lows of the journey of gardening. So come on, let's take a look. So we'll start right here with the tomato tower. These are early girl tomatoes doing pretty well. This year we made a new trellis system for our tomatoes, and each tomato plant is single stemmed up an 8-foot stake. We used string trellising in the past, but since we're in a pretty unprotected environment, I felt like the rigidity of a pole was better than a string because I did see some damage to the stems of the tomato when using the string trellis clips. Overall, the tomatoes have done very well for us. We did see a decent amount of physiologic leaf curl on our tomato plants, and I think a lot of that was the raised bed mix we used was pretty high in peat moss, very well draining, and so I needed to increase the amount of watering that I needed to do in order to support this many large tomato plants. We have 12 of them in this 12 by 4 foot raised bed. But my philosophy is we grow tomato plants for tomatoes, not for the plants. And I'd say overall, these are doing pretty well. So heading over to the pepper bed, these peppers have done very well for us this year. We had really early yields on a lot of these peppers. And I think a lot of that was because we grew the seedlings with a high-powered LED grow light indoors. And it really felt like basically as soon as they went outside and the weather permitted, they were producing fruit. Right next to me, we have 10 poblano peppers, and just really happy with these. They're our favorite pepper. We use them in a lot of different dishes. And the sweet peppers, like these Carmen sweet peppers, are also doing very well. So I would say the peppers are in the win category for this year, and I definitely am going to repeat the relatively early start I did indoors and the growth under high-powered LEDs for next year. So for our summer squash, kind of both a win and a fail here. First of all, this kind of sad-looking plant is a crookneck squash. And I've grown these in the past. I've never been that impressed by them. For some reason, I just keep growing them. I think this is going to be the last year. They really just don't do that well in comparison to a lot of the zucchini varieties that we grow. Now, the other reason this plant looks sad is because it actually has squash vine borer damage down here. You can see the discharge of the larva coming from out of the stem. And I wouldn't specifically call that a fail because it's expected, and we actually have a strategy for that. I'll link a post to a recent video we did explaining how we deal with squash vine borer in a much more hands-off approach than we dealt with it in the past. So for the zucchini, we've actually been pretty happy with this variety. These are Dunja F1 from Johnny's Seeds. And I'll probably grow these again. We've harvested a ton of zucchini off of here, which is pretty typical for zucchini. These plants are just about the end of their lifespan just because of squash vine borer, as I alluded to earlier, but I'll show you what our solution to that is right now. So in this bed, we have a succession planting of summer squash interplanted with bush beans. And as soon as they were planted, I put this netting over the top using these hoops I made for row covers. If you're interested in how I made these, I'll also put a link in this video showing a short video of how I made these hoops. But the idea here is these have been completely protected from squash vine borer. I'll leave this on for just a little bit longer and take those other plants out since I can tell they have larvae in them. And generally I found this second planting of summer squash aren't as affected by squash vine borer, as their activity level tends to drop come August here in our planting zone. So this was the bed we had our broccoli in. We succession planted dragon's tongue bush beans into this bed. You can see in the foreground there's our dinosaur kale, looks like a palm tree at this point. And then I've just sprinkled in some zinnias, and there's an extra futsu winter squash that I had that I planted in a spot here as well. So in this bed, this is where we had our cauliflower. As far as the varieties of the cauliflower, we were really happy with the lavender cauliflower from Johnny's Seeds, as well as the Punta Verde cauliflower that we also got from Johnny's Seeds. A variety I won't grow again is the early snowball variety. That's the white cauliflower that we grew. It really just didn't do that well for us. So if you have any suggestions for white cauliflower for us to try, especially if you garden in the Midwest, let us know in the comments. But you can see here this bed also has bush beans. We have been harvesting these just this past week or two. We'll continue to harvest these for about another 6 weeks because we're just about to start our fall brassicas indoors. We can then come back, clear this bed out in about 6 weeks to plant a new round of cauliflower or broccoli. The nice thing about that is the beans are nitrogen fixers and the brassicas are pretty heavy nitrogen feeders, so they work well together. Up front, these white flowers, you can see that is a buckwheat cover crop. It's a common cover crop we use to fill in spaces as we're waiting for the next crop to go in. So this is the bed we had our carrots on this side, and we have leeks still in the ground here. We have beets here, which we've harvested most of. And then on the side closest to me, we had Cabernet red onions. So the type of carrots we grew were Bolero, and we were pretty happy with them. This is our harvest from just a few weeks ago. The beets did moderately well. We definitely got a large harvest, and we made some pickled beets recently. And the Cabernet red onions just harvested. They are currently curing under a tree because we've had a nice string of dry weather, but a pretty nice harvest on those for just a single row in this 12-foot bed. This is the other onion bed that we have, and we are growing super sweet yellow Utah jumbo onions, and so far we haven't tasted them, so we can't say if they're sweet, but they're definitely jumbo. So I've been pretty happy with those. And then we have just one row of white onions. Interestingly, the Cabernet red onions did pretty well multi-sown, but the white onions seem to be much smaller if grown in a clump. So if I was gonna grow those again, I'd make sure to thin them to individual onions. This bed should be ready to harvest in a week or two. I'm really excited to see what results we get. So this bed probably has the most variety of plants in it, and it's kind of a mixed bag. A lot of the herbs are doing really well. We have oregano, rosemary, thyme. The Swiss chard we planted back in April, and it got quite infested with aphids initially. We actually kept it as a trap crop to encourage ladybugs to come in, and they did so. In the very back you can see some brownish plants, and that is dill that we allowed to go to seed. And the basil in this bed does have a fungal disease, so I'm going to take that out soon. So speaking of basil, we have the 3 varieties of basil that we grew right here. I think this is called a dark opal basil, and I've been relatively pleased with that. This one here is just a sweet basil that we bought at a big box store as a seed packet I had, and it's done moderately well. But the standout are these everleaf tie towers. You can see the growth habit. While the other basil is bolting and producing flowers, this just keeps putting on vegetative growth. really amazing. I think there's a version of that in sweet basil that I'm really excited to try next year. So in the same beds as the basil, we have our eggplant up front, and just like our peppers, I was very impressed with how early our yields of the eggplant was this year. We grew 2 varieties, Turkish Delight, and we also grew Black Beauty, which is a little bit more of a traditional shaped eggplant. Right in front of me, one of our tomato plants in these 8-foot cages, and you can see it's getting to the top here. This variety is Green Bee, and it's a slightly larger than cherry tomato sized fruit that stays green with just some yellow shoulders. It's a very firm, not very sweet tomato, but I really like the texture, the crunch that it gives. Over this way, we have some of our cucumbers, and just like any other gardener, lots of times I leave these for too long. I did find, however, that these overly ripe cucumbers that get really seedy, the chickens really love eating the seeds out of the inside of the cucumbers. And then over the cattle panel archway, we have butternut squash. This is Waltham butternut squash. It is a variety I really like. It does very, very well for us, and I'll repeat growing it next year. And we've got some nice looking butternut squash. We love growing winter squash that store well because we produce quite a lot of food in our garden, and it's always nice to have something that you can just put down in the cellar and it will be available for butternut squash soup come the cool months. So here in this bed we have a variety of plants. In the foreground is a super tasty tomato which has a little bit more of a determinate growth habit. That plant's done very well for us. Right next to me, this is Super Sweet 100 cherry tomato. Really tasty small red cherry tomatoes. And across the way there, that kind of paltry looking plant is a Futsu butternut, and this is a second try with that variety. It didn't do well for me a previous year. I really like the idea of it, so I grew it again. It's going to be the last year I grow it. Just really doesn't have the vigorous growth that we generally see in the more traditional Waltham butternut. So this arch has our melons. We're growing 3 different types of melons. Over here on this side, these are sugar cube cantaloupe, and they just make these really small, super good, non-mealy fleshed cantaloupe. It's my favorite cantaloupe. And then over on this side, there's 2 different types of melon we're growing. A savor melon. Ooh, looks like I have a cucumber beetle here. I gotta kill that. As well as an Arava melon, which is a green fleshed melon. We're gonna get into the straw bale and in-ground beds, but before I did that, I just wanna show you, this is something I was working on last night. Just rough cut wood chips. We got these from Chip Drop, and we've gotten about 60 yards of wood chips so far. We've used a variety of things for the pathways of the garden, and I made a little video of the pros and cons of the different substrates you can use for that I'll link. But the conclusion basically was that a deep mulching of wood chips is the best option that we've found, and it's proved very true. All the areas that have 8+ inches of wood chips are completely weed-free in our garden. So for our paste tomatoes, we grew them in straw bales, and we have a total of 48 plants of determinate paste tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes are the bush type tomatoes that grow to a certain height and then stop and then put their energy towards the fruit. We really like determinate tomatoes for paste tomatoes because the goal is to have a lot of the fruit ripen at the same time so we can have a large canning session to can tomato sauce and pizza sauce. These were trellised with a Florida weave, but the plants are so heavy with fruit that they've kind of flopped over. And like I said previously, my goal of growing tomato plants is to grow tomatoes, not necessarily beautiful plants. And these plants definitely prove true to that philosophy. They are loaded with paste tomatoes, so we're definitely going to get a good yield and should allow us to can enough tomato sauce to reach to next July. As far as what they're growing in, the straw bales, these are grown in conditioned straw. And if you Google straw bale gardening, it generally will give you a recipe to how to condition your straw. But I especially like these in early gardens, and this is the first year for our garden, because it brings in a ton of composted organic material to add to the garden. So we'll repeat this for next year and probably the years to come, continuing to add this deep, rich organic matter to our garden. Plus, they work great as just quick and easy raised beds. Each one of these raised beds is 6 straw bales. So continuing with the straw bale theme, this is a, ooh, there's some thunder there. This is a sugar baby watermelon grown in a straw bale, and currently it has 3 watermelon that it's growing. You can see one of them right here. They're kind of a volleyball to basketball size round watermelon. I really like the size of them. I've grown them in the past. I have grown them on cattle panels before. They're a little heavy, and I lost one previously when the hammock I set up for it broke. So now I like to grow them on the ground. I set these straw bales away from the rest of the garden so they can kind of just sprawl out. Similarly, the sweet potatoes, also grown in straw bales, they like room to kind of spread around everywhere. So just like the watermelon, I can set it apart from the garden. Added bonus with the sweet potatoes is when it comes to harvesting them, you just need to break apart the straw bale and there's your sweet potatoes, no digging. So the in-ground potatoes are all ready to harvest. You can tell that because the plants look like they're dying back. And we've been harvesting mostly the purple Viking potatoes, which were really good. And we got to get to harvesting these. Overall, our yields were moderate. For every small seed potato that we planted, we only got maybe 3-ish large purple Viking potatoes. We'll see about these other varieties. Over here, I want to show you a big fail, which is the sweet corn. So gardening is not all glory, and you can see by the sad state of this sweet corn that we had some sort of pest come in here. We do have a couple groundhogs on the property. Wouldn't be surprised if it was one of them, although I know raccoons also in the past have really tried to get at any sweet corn that I've tried. So being a fenceless garden, I knew I was going to have to set something up here. I just didn't realize how early they would get to the corn. This corn had just tasseled, was just starting to produce corn. They basically came in there with their little hands and chomped a lot of it. I do have a solar-powered electric fence. I'm trying to decide whether it's worth setting that up to save the remaining corn or basically just take it out and plant something else here. For those of you wondering, a fence is definitely in the future plans, probably this fall/winter, but I wasn't positive on the final layout of the garden and I didn't want to put a fence in and then change my mind. So I wanted to get a season in to really feel out the space. Gardening always has its ups and downs and setbacks, even after 20 years of gardening. I always find every season has its own challenge. So if you are struggling with your own specific challenges, just know we all do. And the one thing I've learned over the years is how to better roll with the punches, learn from that learning experience, and then move on to something better. Well, it sounds like a thunderstorm is rolling in, so I better stop the tour. I hope you enjoyed our midsummer tour of our garden, and I hope your gardens are flourishing too. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments, or if you just enjoyed the video, let us know. We love the encouragement and support. And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing. Happy gardening, everyone.